Hey up everybody and welcome back to the Audi Cycling YouTube channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Tour of Romandie. I did actually record one of these earlier today, but Josh Tarling has been removed from the start list, so I just thought I may as well do it again because it didn't upload this morning for some reason, so I thought I may as well just do it once more. So Ayuso is the most expensive rider, but before we get into that, we're going to take a look at the stage profiles. We've got a flat prologue to start with, which is rather technical, but definitely includes enough longer stretches of road for it still to be in like the prologue experts TT specialist category, I would say, although there will likely be some surprise people inside the top 10. Stage 1, obviously, with a prologue, this is stage 1. In theory, is going to be some sort of reduced sprint, although there is that 1.8k, 7.3% climb towards the end, so maybe somebody might chance a late flyer. Stage 2 is a relatively flat stage. There is this kind of Cat 2 climb, and then we've got a big valley, and then the Salvan Le Maracot, which is 7.6k at 7.5%. Stage 3 is a 16k time trial, but it's got a 1.8k 6.5% climb at the start, which is it's a pretty testing TT actually. Stage 4 goes up to Les Sars, which is 13.8k at 6%. You can kind of see it's a bit steeper at the start, a bit shallower in the middle, and then it kind of goes steep again, a bit shallower and then steep again. So it's a bit there's definitely some differing gradients there, but there might be points in there where it's definitely worthwhile being in the draft. And then stage 5 looks like another sort of sprint day, and it's definitely worth mentioning these sprint days aren't easy by any means. They sort of look like the ones you'd see at like the Tour of Wallonie or the Bauwals Belgium Tour or something, where it's really suited towards probably more like puncher and sprinter crossover types. But anyway, Juan Ayuso is the most expensive at 24 credits. I think he makes a lot of sense for this race, considering that he looks to be very good at time trialing and very good at climbing, and after all, he has recently won Itzulia Basque Country, with, you know, the massive kind of caveat of all those other favourites crashing, unfortunately. Ayuso does also sometimes get involved with a bunch of sprints in Tour of Romandie. We've seen that in the past, so I think Ayuso's a really good one. Yates, on the other hand, he's one of the many pure climbers in this race, I would say, whose scoring chances are really limited to those two mountain top finishes, and because his time trialing is, it's fine, but it's not going to be, I think, contending, big points in those time trials. Maybe he sneaks into a top 10, but he's not going to be putting in like an Ayuso level performance, if you see what I mean. So Yates, I think at 22 is quite expensive. The Bora guys of Vlasov and Hindley, I would say Vlasov makes more sense, considering that he's got a slightly better time trial and a slightly better sprint, so maybe he gets involved in the sprints. Again, this is Romandie. Anything really happens with these sprints. You do see GC riders getting involved with sprints sometimes, because the sprinting field is not very great in this field. So you might see riders trying to nab some bonus seconds. So Vlasov makes more sense than Hindley, but neither of them look particularly great at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So I'm going to be sticking clear of them, but I would say that Vlasov is the better of the two. Very similarly, Lenny Martinez, although he's in fantastic form, he won the Tour de Doub, or was it? I don't think it was the Tour de Doub, but it was one of those. He's won a couple of those French races recently. But again, he's very limited to those two mountaintop finishes, where he, even if he wins both of those, he will like borderline be worth it at that point. So I just think that it's worthwhile probably targeting guys who might also do well in the TTs to try and gain some time there. McNulty, I think, is going to be a domestique who will post a couple of good time trial performances as well, so he might nab you a few 100 points. Bernal did look very good at Liège, it's worth mentioning, and I think that he's definitely a top 5 candidate for this race, even if his time trialing isn't that brilliant. Gaudu, personally, I think that Martinez has got a better shot of being the leader of Groupama. I just don't think Gaudu's looking that great at the moment. Contrary to that, Lutsenko's looking fantastic right now. The Giro de Blutzo, where he won that ahead of a lot of strong UAE Team Emirates riders, and he was also 8th at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, where he was very animating. Like, he was trying to get off the front, he was trying to close down moves, so I think Lutsenko's a really good choice, and the Astana Kazakhstan team really looks around him, and they really need some UCI points, so I think Lutsenko could do something here. Mass, I never really seem to like picking Mass, to be honest, unless it is a Grand Tour. In the stage races, I just think there are usually better options, especially when you consider that Lutsenko and Van Wilder, I think, are better choices at the same price. Van Wilder, speaking of which, he's a good time trialist. He'll probably come inside the top 10. Him and Lutsenko quite similar. So I think those two are definitely the best ones in the 14 credit area. 12 credits, we've got Arensman, Carapaz, Caruso, Ciccone, Teo, Hayter, and Sivakov. I would say I like Carapaz because of how he looked at Liège. He did try to follow Pogacar, and I think he honestly kind of looked the second best climber in that race based upon that. So I would say that Carapaz looks pretty good for this race, especially when you consider that he, in my opinion, can do exactly what, say, like a Hindley and Martinez can do in this race, except that he's 4 credits cheaper. So I think that Carapaz is a good one to be picking. I think Caruso's a good one for a top 10 if you're wanting a bit of safety. Hayter usually just pulls it out the bag at Tour of Romandie. In other races, perhaps he doesn't look too great, and I think that definitely has blacklisted him on a few people's heads. But Hayter at Tour of Romandie just kind of turns it on. 2 time trials, one prologue, 1 time trial, a couple of reduced sprints. This is really Hayter kind of territory. So I think that Hayter is a really good one to be picking. And Sivakov, I expect just to be a domestique, to be honest with you. Very similar to Brandon McNulty. 10 credit riders, maybe Alaphilippe gets involved with the sprints, maybe he doesn't. But honestly, Aram Baru seems like the safer choice if you're looking for somebody to do that. Dainese will likely get dropped, whereas Aram Baru, he was 15th at Liège. He was very good at Basque Country, constantly posting top 10s there. And I think that in this sprinting field, honestly, Aram Baru could do very similar to what he did at Basque Country, where he was very much worthwhile putting on. So Aram Baru I really like. Dunbar has just had too many DNFs this year for me to feel confident putting him on. Higuita was dropped, again, far too regularly and far too quickly at Tour of the Alps for my liking. Guillaume Martin, he'll probably just lose too much time in the time trials for my liking. But Plapp, I think, is good, to be honest. He was good at Paris-Nice. He's got the time trialling behind him as well. And I do think that Plapp could definitely crack, 300 to 400 points in this race. And I think at 10 credits, that's definitely worthwhile going with. 8 credit riders. Obviously, we've had the removal of Josh Tarling, which is pretty much what this whole video being re-recorded is based upon. I like Consonni for this. They do have Thibaut Nace in this race too. But I think that Consonni, in theory, is the better sprinter of those out of those two. So I expect Consonni to be sprinting. And in this field, he could probably pick up a win, I reckon. You've got Godon, who obviously also Paul Lepere has been removed from the start list. So Godon, I expect to be sprinting for Decathlon. However, Andrea van der Lam is here, so it's kind of a either or with those two. Christian Rodriguez for a top 15 in GC. You've got Sheffield, who I realised last time I was beating the Sheffield drum was in Tirreno, where he binned it in the opening TT. But you know what? We're back again with the Sheffield pick. I think that he is going to be worthwhile, especially with Tarling not here. I think that Sheffield is probably a top 3 favourite for possibly both of the time trials. And you know what? He climbs quite well too. He was 16th in GC at Tirreno, so I think Sheffield does make a lot of sense. Hopefully he just doesn't overcook it like he did in that Tirreno TT. I think he will have learnt from that mistake, hopefully. And Tratnik I like as well, because Visma Lease Bike don't really have a big leader in this race, and I think Tratnik is their leader for this. So I expect him to be fully supported by the Visma Lease Bike team. And to be honest with you, all the other guys, maybe Catania does a good TT, maybe Harada gets up there in a couple of sprints, maybe Amarai does some good TTs and holds on to a okay GC. Berthet has been climbing well as well. But I just think that all these guys, that they'll get you some decent points, but I just don't think they're going to be quite as good as maybe a Sheffield or a Consonni. 6 credit riders, you might need a couple of these or a few of these, depending on how heavy you're going at the top. You might want to go with, I would probably say the thing that you want to aim for is that lucky person who might crack a top 10 in the prologue and then hangs on into stage 2 to get those GC points. And if they can also sprint a little bit, that's like golden. So you might get Asgreen, could do good in the TTs, but recent form doesn't really dictate that's what he's going to be able to do. There's Bittner here, who is a good sprinter, but there's also like Sean Flynn and Emils Liepins in this race, so I don't know if they're going to be going for either one of those two. It's probably worthwhile looking at the DSM Feminic Postanal press release before you go picking. I haven't looked at it just yet. Jan Christen, fantastic talent. I think he'll just be a domestique, but he does have some good time trialling legs, so maybe he could crack a top 10. After all, he is Swiss, so it's like a home race. I reckon he could certainly do something in the time trials, and maybe he hangs on to a top 20 GC, gets the assist points for Ayuso and stuff, and the team GC points. So Kristen's pretty decent as well. Stefan de Bod does pull out some decent time trials, as does De Gent, but again, kind of years gone by, certainly. Fowler Plost could be up there in GC. He did that in like the Oman and races, so he could do it here. Sean Flynn, as I mentioned, could be sprinting for DSM, but I don't know who they're exactly going for. Hedda Hotz as a time trialist. Hausen for a top 20 GC. Rainer Keplinger was good in Comunitat Valenciana. He actually time trials quite well. He did it for UAE Tour, but then he crashed out, unfortunately. So he's a good climber, but also time trialist. So he, again, is doing like a dual purpose there. He will be working, I think, for Caruso, but Keplinger at 6 credits is certainly worthwhile having on your shortlist. And other than them, there's of course the aforementioned Thibaut Nace, who did finish second in a sprint in the Tour of Romandie last year, which had a very similar level of sprinting talent here. They might be going for Consonni, they might be going for Thibaut Nace, I don't know. I also don't know how he'll do in the prologue. His prologuing history isn't that great, in all honesty, although his just ability as a cyclocross rider, and therefore his insane bike handling, might get him through into a top 10, and if he does sprint, then he will be worth it. But again, it's a bit risky with Consonni here as well. Oldani might sprint for Cofidis. Ivo Oliveira is a good one, usually puts in a decent prologue, and he also get the assist points, so he's very similar to Jan Christen in that regard. You got Rafferty, who was second in that Gran Camino TT on road bikes, and it's worth mentioning that the prologue will also be on road bikes, so Rafferty could certainly be worthwhile thinking about, especially since I think he could be the fastest rider that they have, so he might get involved in the sprint. So certainly Rafferty could be he's more of a dark horse pick, I think. Not a lot of people will be picking Darren Rafferty. Tim van Dijk I like because he does do good prologues, and as the lead-out man of Olav Koy, and therefore I think the fastest rider in the Visma Lease Bike team, I think that he could be a decent pick to get involved in the sprints as well. So Van Dijk I like as well. Von Cellini usually gets involved in the sprints as well. Voisard was top 5 GC at Vigilo d'Abruzzo, so he'll probably finish top 15 GC here. And Zieglard is like a prologue expert. Go and look at his stats in the prologues. He usually finishes like inside the top 6 or something. So Zieglard's quite a decent one to be picking if you just want a pure prologue rider. And 4 credit riders, if you really need them, maybe Brenner could be one. Hepburn sometimes pulls out a decent TT and a half, but again, that's kind of, it's been a while since that's happened. And other than that, maybe Callum Scottson sometimes does a decent TT, but honestly, I would recommend you try and stick away from the 4 credit riders. I don't think there's a lot there. I think it's better to try and go with a lot of the 6 credit riders instead that I mentioned, because there's a lot of good potential scoring there. So I would say go with those and stick away from the 4s as best you can. And this is my team at the moment. Of course, with Tarling out, I've swapped Consonni in. So I've got Hayter, Plapp, Lutsenko, Ayuso, Arambaru, Tim van Dijk, Magnus Sheffield, Jan Tratnik, and Simone Consonni. So I've kind of got a few GC guys in Tratnik, Ayuso, Lutsenko, and Plapp. Some sprinters in Hayter, Arambaru, Consonni, and then kind of like Sheffield and Van Dijk being a bit kind of like the rogue cards in there. I really like it. I think you can make some really cool teams in this Tour of Romandie without some, the big tier 1 favourites like your Poggies in here. I think it's going to make for some interesting teams. But be sure to put your team in the comments section down below. Let's see how many interesting teams we can get. All that is left to say is to stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video. Salut!